Steve Kinion, thank you for visiting with us. We appreciate you being here.
You're welcome.
For those unfamiliar with captives, would you help us to understand how they differ from other forms of risk retention? And are captives essentially a form of self-insurance?
Yes, Frank, they are a form of self-insurance. Now, self-insurance can come in many forms. I mean, one form is to simply put cash money in a bank account or under your mattress, so to speak, and wait for that, that event to happen. Or otherwise, a captive insurance company can be formed under laws of a state, or like the District of Columbia, or a U.S. territory, or even offshore jurisdictions, not in the United States, wherein it is actually an insurance company licensed as an insurance company and regulated as an insurance company.
Thank you, Steve. And one would imagine there are a number of benefits of captive formation. There may also be some downsides. Could you give us a synopsis there of both?
Well, one of the benefits is being able to have maximum control of risk, right? When a captive insurance company is formed, it allows the captive insured to be able to write their own policy, maybe for a unique and specific risk that is not covered in the traditional, or what we know as the commercial insurance market. That's one aspect. So the claims process as well. With a captive insurance company, you typically don't get into a dispute with your insurance company over whether this claim is covered or whether this claim is not covered. However, on the other hand, if there is a claim and it is a large claim, it could cause the captive to pay a full limit loss, right, in that instance. Which, of course, it should be doing because that's what the contract mandates.
Steve, when I think of captives, I think that historically, is it fair to say that captives were essentially domiciled outside of the U.S. almost exclusively for many, many years? That's no longer the case today, is it? Can you give us a little bit of both an historic snapshot and then speak a little bit to the sort of domestic market for captives today here in the United States?
You're correct, Frank, in the instance that captives were formed primarily in Bermuda in the 1950s and 1960s. They really did not become a U.S. domiciled version of captive insurance until the early 1980s when Vermont enacted a captive insurance law. Colorado did enact a captive insurance law in the early 1970s. However, that never grew, whereas Vermont's effort in the early 1980s did. I always like to say that Vermont has about a 20 to 25 year head start on any other state in the United States. Then in the 1990s, South Carolina started becoming a captive insurance domicile. And since then, captive insurance has grown where the majority of U.S. states now have captive insurance laws.
Thank you, Steve. I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you if you would to talk a little bit about regulation of captives. Obviously, many members of our audience are insurance regulators and or state lawmakers. What does that landscape look like? It'd be helpful for our folks to understand that.
Because captive insurance is a form of self-insurance, captive insurance companies are regulated, but they are regulated differently. So a traditional insurance company, let's say like a Chubb or an Allstate, there are certain requirements that are mandated upon it, such as statutory accounting, for example. Whereas on the other hand, a captive insurance company, again, self-insurance, doesn't use statutory accounting principles to record its financial statements and file its financial statements. It may use generally accepted accounting principles, or otherwise known as GAAP. That's one major key difference. Also, captive insurers are not members of guarantee funds, so as a result, there's that safety net is missing. But again, it's a form of self-insurance, so that safety net really shouldn't be there to start with.
Thank you, Steve. For members of our audience of public policymakers that would like to learn more about captive insurance, do you have suggestions as to where they might go? Where can they learn more?
There are a number of ways to learn more about captive insurance. Gosh, Frank, I looked today on YouTube and typed in captive insurance, and there are a number of ways to look at it. But there are podcasts, for example, like Captive Intelligence. Captive Review magazine is a good source of captive information. And then if a prospect is considering forming a captive insurance company, they should check with their local in-state insurance department. For example, suppose a company in Oklahoma City or Tulsa is considering forming a captive. They can call me, right? I'm available at the Oklahoma Insurance Department, or they can contact the Oklahoma Captive Insurance Association.
Steve Kinion, thank you for visiting with us. We appreciate it.
Delighted. You're welcome. And thanks for inviting me to participate.